The Coalition's demand was almost condescending. Before Earth could join galactic society, humanity had to prove it was peaceful. The human ambassador didn't argue. She simply opened a channel to Earth's most classified archive, the files no outsider had ever seen, and let the Coalition watch. What they saw wasn't gentle. It was every threat humanity had quietly ended, every war stopped by force, every danger erased in the dark so that ordinary humans could sleep in peace and call themselves peaceful. The ambassador let the silence stretch, then spoke softly. You wanted proof we're peaceful. This is what peaceful costs. Do you still want us to join, or would you rather we stayed out here keeping it? This wasn't a bluff. It was a confession. For centuries, a single question has haunted every intelligence agency and military command on Earth. What is peace actually worth? The answer is darker than anyone wants to admit, and it sits at the heart of humanity's most dangerous secret. The Coalition diplomats sat frozen in their chairs. They had expected poetry. They had expected philosophical treatises on harmony and coexistence. They had not expected uncut footage of silent battlefields and after-action reports stamped with black ink and the words threat eliminated. The first file was from 1947, a rogue weapons program on a minor planet in a neighboring system. Earth had no treaty obligation to intervene, but the threat was real and it was growing. So a team was sent. No declarations were made. No thanks were given. The files simply showed the mission's success and the cleanup. Then the next file loaded, and the next. The archive stretched across 3 centuries of human activity in the galaxy. Quiet wars fought in the shadows between stars. Preventative strikes that erased dangers before they could bloom into existential threats. Biological containment operations. Covert disruption of hostile artificial intelligences. And through it all, a single directive anchored every operation: leave no trace. Ensure the public never knows. Let humanity sleep peacefully believing themselves peaceful, because the alternative, public awareness of every lurking danger, would shatter the very peace they sought to protect. This was not a military showing off its conquests. This was a species confessing the weight it had silently carried for generations. And then the ambassador selected a file marked with the current date. The room fell silent. There was no historical footage here, just a live status indicator, pools in green, with coordinates hovering over a distant star system. The realization hit the Coalition like a physical blow. The archives weren't just history. They were a live feed, and the next operation was already underway. The live feed resolved into an orbital view of a planet the Coalition catalog listed as Zeta Reticuli Prime. A gas giant's moon, rich in rare minerals and largely ignored by galactic trade routes. But the human monitors had flagged something unsettling: a thermal bloom deep within the equatorial desert, growing in intensity over the past 3 months. The Coalition's own surveillance drones had passed over the same region a dozen times and registered nothing. The humans saw it because they were looking for what others dismissed as impossible. On the screen, a countdown timer read 19 minutes. The ambassador explained without turning from the display. This moon is uninhabited, or rather, it was supposed to be. 3 years ago, a private venture from the Krell Alliance filed mining rights and then promptly went dark. The Krell reported no suspicious activity, but human deep space listening posts intercepted a recurring encrypted burst, a signal structure that matched no known civilian protocol. It matched a military handshake used by the extinct Rhizanth hegemony. The hegemony had been declared eradicated 70 years ago after a brutal war of expansion that nearly consumed 3 sectors. But they didn't vanish. They hid. They built in silence. And now, beneath that desert, a genetic weapon was nearing completion. Something designed to target the neural pathways common to 90% of Coalition species. The Coalition delegates were not merely shocked. They were terrified, angry, and deeply confused. How had their intelligence agencies missed this? How long had Earth known? And what gave humanity the right to act alone? The ambassador's response was calm. She pulled up another file from the archive. Fleet Action Designation Echo Warden, 91 years ago. A human deep recon vessel discovered a Rhizanth sleeper cell inside a civilian cargo consortium. That cell had been slow-rolling a plan to deploy a tailored pathogen on 7 high-population worlds simultaneously. Humanity's leadership faced a choice. They could bring the evidence to the fledgling coalition and hope for a coordinated multilateral response, a process that, based on historical precedent, would take a minimum of 18 months. Or they could act. They chose to act. The pathogen never reached its target. The Rhizanth cell was dismantled so cleanly that the cargo consortium's own internal audit ruled it a logistical failure. 7 worlds went about their business never knowing they had been one delayed shipment away from biosphere collapse. This was the pattern. Again and again, the archive showed it. A threat identified, assessed, and neutralized before it could register on anyone else's radar. Sometimes it was a remnant of the old hegemony. Sometimes it was a rogue artificial intelligence that had escaped a coalition lab and been hushed up. Sometimes it was a natural cosmic event, an asteroid with a trajectory so subtle that only human astronomers and their eccentric models caught it, and then a deflection mission that looked like a routine mining accident. Humanity had been running a shadow peacekeeping operation across hundreds of light years for over 2 centuries, and not one of those saved worlds knew the name of the species that had kept them breathing. The coalition's senior delegate, a being named Kelthor of the Avon, was the first to find his voice. His people were among those who had benefited from the Echo Warden action without knowing it. His homeworld, Avon Prime, had been on the pathogen's target list. The ambassador nodded, acknowledging the connection, but she wasn't finished. She pulled up the live feed again. The countdown now read 12 minutes. The human strike team had already inserted. The operation was proceeding as planned, but there was a complication. The target facility was not merely a lab. It was a buried ship. A Rhizanth dreadnought, fully operational, its reactor core doubling as the incubation chamber for the weapon. If the strike went clean, the ship would be destroyed along with the genetic payload. If it went wrong, the ship would launch, and the weapon would be dispersed across a dozen systems before any fleet could intercept. The coalition had maintained a doctrine of peace through dialogue and mutual disarmament for generations. They had no rapid response force capable of handling such a threat, and they knew it. The ambassador let that realization settle. She had shown them the archive of what peaceful cost. Now she was showing them the price of being unprepared. Then Kelthor asked the one question the humans had been dreading. If this threat exists on a moon the Krell claimed to monitor, how do we know Earth didn't plant it there to justify this operation? The silence in the chamber was absolute. The ambassador didn't flinch. She simply opened another file. A communications intercept from 6 hours ago. The voice was unmistakably Krell, and it was speaking in panicked, unguarded tones about a containment failure and a cover-up that was about to unravel. The Krell delegate, who had been sitting in the chamber, was now visibly trembling. And that was the pivot. The coalition wasn't just dealing with a secret human war machine. They were dealing with the revelation that some of their own members had been complicit in the threats, either through negligence or active concealment. Humanity had been cleaning up everyone's mess, and now the mess was set to detonate on a live broadcast to the entire Galactic Council. The countdown hit 9 minutes. The ambassador turned back to the display and spoke one sentence that yanked the entire chamber into Act Two's second half. There's a second ship. There's a second ship. The ambassador's words landed like a physical blow. The live feed split into 2 windows. The first still showed the strike team closing on the buried dreadnought. The second displayed a long-range sensor plot, a single ship moving at sublight toward the inner system of Avon Prime. It had departed the moon's far side 12 hours earlier, masked by a debris field, and was now well inside the heliopause. A Rhizanth stealth carrier, its hull cold and quiet, running with minimal emissions. And according to the telemetry Earth's listening posts had cracked, it was carrying 36 independently targeted genetic warheads. Kelthor rose from his seat, his usually melodic Avon voice cracking into something raw. "That's my homeworld. You knew about this for 12 hours and said nothing." The ambassador didn't apologize. She explained. The moment Earth flagged the carrier, they had two choices: alert the coalition and trigger a panicked, uncoordinated response that would tip off the Rhizanth and guarantee the launch, or deploy their own asset and hope to intercept before the first warhead separated. They chose silence. They always chose silence. But here's what made the chamber go absolutely still. The second ship wasn't some remnant of the old hegemony that had crawled out of a forgotten dock. Its transponder, dormant until 6 minutes ago, had just pinged with a Krell Alliance maintenance code. The very same code used by the private mining venture that had claimed the moon. The Krell delegate, a being named K. Varn, was already stammering denials when the ambassador pulled up a financial ledger. Payments from Krell shell companies to black market shipyards. Delivery logs of Rhizanth biological substrates to the moon's subsurface vaults. And a series of encrypted communiques between K. Varn's own office and the facility's command center, the most recent of which read, "Cleanup protocol initiated. Human interference suspected. Accelerate deployment." K. Varn tried to bolt. Coalition security detained him before he reached the door, but the damage had spread far beyond one corrupt delegate. The implication was staggering. A sitting member of the Coalition Council had been actively nurturing a Rhizanth resurrection, using the very trade agreements and non-aggression pacts the Council had championed as proof that peace worked. Humanity hadn't just been cleaning up humanity's messes. They'd been cleaning up the Coalition's. The countdown now read 6 minutes. On the moon, the strike team had breached the Dreadnought's hull and were fighting through automated defenses. The ambassador explained that the team was heavily outnumbered and cut off from extraction. Their original mission was sabotage, plant charges on the reactor, disable the weapon, then retreat to a stealth shuttle. But when the second ship was discovered, the mission changed. The Dreadnought's reactor wasn't just a power source. It was a quantum-entangled detonator linked to the carrier's warhead stockpile. If the team could force a controlled meltdown, the carrier's arsenal would cook off in its launch bays. But that meant staying inside the blast radius. Every single member of the strike team had volunteered to stay. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted over one another, some demanding immediate fleet deployment, others accusing humanity of manufacturing the crisis, a few simply weeping. The ambassador raised her hand and the feed shifted to a third window, a lone vessel accelerating hard toward the carrier's projected path. The Silent Vigil. A human deep space hunter-killer, so classified that its very existence was a crime under 3 separate coalition transparency treaties. It had been shadowing the carrier for 2 weeks, waiting for a window. That window was now, but the Vigil was outgunned. Its mission was not to destroy the carrier, it couldn't, but to buy the strike team 60 additional seconds by jamming the carrier's launch sequencers with a focused electronic warfare suite. Even that was a suicide run. The Vigil would have to dive into the carrier's defensive envelope and hold position there, drawing fire, until the meltdown pulse hit. Then came the "it gets worse" moment. The ambassador pulled up the genetic weapons payload schematic. It wasn't merely a pathogen. It was a self-replicating nanite swarm designed to dismantle Avon biology at the molecular level and reassemble the raw material into Rhizanth-compatible tissue. A full planetary conversion weapon. If even one warhead reached Avon Prime, the entire population, 14 billion sentient beings, would be converted into alien biomass within 72 hours, and the Rhizanth had built 36 of them. Kelthor sat down heavily, his hands trembling. He had spent his entire career advocating for multilateral peace processes, for the idea that no species needed to bear weapons beyond a ceremonial guard. He had looked at the archive of Earth's secret wars with something between horror and contempt. Now he was staring at the cost of his own doctrine. The Coalition's peace had been a fragile shell, and inside it, predators had been breeding. The countdown reached 3 minutes. The strike team confirmed reactor breach. The silent vigil engaged, its jamming suite flooding the carrier's systems with cascading noise. The carrier's point defenses lit up, bracketing the vigil with plasma fire. The human vessel's shields flickered, held, flickered again. On the moon feed, the strike leader's voice came through for the first time, calm and measured as if reporting a weather delay. He confirmed the charges were set, the manual detonator primed. He named his team members, 7 names, one from each human continental division, and then he said a single phrase that would be debated for decades. For the ones who sleep peacefully. The feed went white. The meltdown pulse shot outward at faster-than-light speeds through the quantum link. Aboard the carrier, 36 warhead bays ignited simultaneously. The silent vigil's jamming held just long enough. The carrier didn't launch. It simply ceased to exist. And 14 billion Avon, going about their lives on a world that had no idea any of this was happening, continued to draw breath. The chamber was silent. The timer on the display read 0. The ambassador closed the archives. Then she spoke the line that would end the Coalition's innocence forever. 10 minutes ago, you asked us to prove we were peaceful. We have done so. Now you must answer a different question. Do you still want us to join, knowing what we are? Or would you rather we remained outside in the dark, doing what you cannot? The chamber did not erupt. It could not. The question hung in the air like a blade, and every delegate knew that their answer would reshape galactic civilization. Kelthor was the first to stand again. His voice had lost its melodic quality entirely. He spoke slowly, deliberately, acknowledging that 14 billion of his people owed their continued existence to a species they had just met. He asked the ambassador what Earth wanted: a seat at the table, a voice in decisions, a place in the light. The ambassador's answer caught everyone off guard. We didn't ask for this meeting. You asked us. We accepted because the time for shadows was ending, but we are not here to beg. If you refuse us, we will continue as we have, alone, in the dark, keeping the peace you cannot. A new kind of panic rippled through the council. Kavarn's arrest had already leaked to other delegations. The Krell alliance was in chaos, its remaining representatives scrambling to distance themselves from the conspiracy. But other species were just as frightened of humanity as they were of the Rhizanth. The frail harmony of the Undari, a race of poets and philosophers who had never known violence, demanded that Earth be sanctioned for violating galactic sovereignty. The ambassador pulled up the legal charter of the Coalition itself. The moon was unclaimed space. The Rhizanth were an outlaw species with no treaty protection, and the Coalition's own mutual defense clause had never been activated because no one had detected the threat. Humanity had committed no crime. They had simply filled a vacuum. This was the unbearable truth. The Coalition's peace was not a virtue. It was a luxury afforded by ignorance. The deliberations lasted 10 hours. Outside the chamber, the live feed had been cut from public access, but fragments were already spreading through news networks. Panic and awe were intermingled. Finally, the vote was called. Not on whether humanity was peaceful. That question had been answered in a way no one could unsee. The vote was on a new compact, the Shadow Accords. A slim majority, 62%, voted to admit humanity as a full member of the Coalition with a singular mandate: to serve as the Office of Silent Defense, authorized to act preemptively against existential threats, but with a transparent oversight committee drawn from all willing member species. A compromise. Civilizations that had spent millennia disdaining violence were now institutionalizing it, overseen by the very species they had once feared as brutes. The ambassador accepted on behalf of Earth, then added a single clause. The Oversight Committee would be empowered not merely to review humanity's actions, but to require other members to contribute resources, intelligence, and if necessary, personnel. The burden would be shared. The darkness would no longer belong to one world alone. Several delegates recoiled, but the measure passed with a quiet majority. For the first time in millennia, the coalition was choosing to arm itself, not against humanity but alongside it. Then came the surprise. The ambassador turned to Kelthor and said there was something she wanted him to see. She reopened the feed from the silent vigil. The ship was scarred, its hull breached in 3 sections, but it was still flying. And in its medical bay, visible through an internal camera, 7 figures were sitting up on diagnostic beds, battered, bandaged, but unmistakably alive. The strike team, the ones who had supposedly died in the reactor meltdown. The ambassador explained that the meltdown pulse had been designed with a 20-second delay. In that window, an experimental displacement shuttle had pulled them into a tight beam retrieval corridor and jumped them to the vigil. The technology was still classified, and the team had accepted a 90% probability of catastrophic failure. The fact that all 7 were breathing was, in the ambassador's words, more luck than we deserved. She did not mention that one of those 7 was her son. She did not need to. Kelthor asked for their names. The ambassador listed them slowly, so the entire council could hear the names of the first humans to be publicly acknowledged as defenders of the coalition. The chamber stood. Not in applause, many species lack that gesture, but in something more profound. A shared recognition that the moral architecture they had built over eons was incomplete. Peace without defense was a dream. Peace with defense was a burden. And now, for the first time, the two were beginning to merge. The ambassador closed the archive display, but left the medical bay feed open, those 7 faces a quiet testimony that sacrifice and survival could coexist. She then informed the council that the archives she had shown them represented only the last 50 years of active operations. The full record spanned 2 centuries, and with the signing of the Shadow Accords, Earth was prepared to open every file to the Oversight Committee, every prevented war, every early intervention, every classified failure and its bloody lesson. The coalition would see not just the victories, but the mistakes. The ambassador said one final thing before yielding the floor. You wanted to know if we were peaceful. The truth is more complicated. We are a species that knows exactly what peace costs because we have paid that price in blood and silence for generations. Now the invoice has arrived. It is addressed to all of us. The coalition that emerged from that day was not the one that had issued its condescending demand. It could not be. Some delegations withdrew into isolation, unable to reconcile their identity with the new reality. Others stepped forward, volunteering resources and personnel for the Oversight Committee, finally ready to share the burden they had outsourced to accident and ignorance. Humanity, for its part, did not gloat. They simply opened the archives, every success, every failure, every moral compromise, and let the galaxy see what it means to be the species that stands between the darkness and the dream. The question that had started it all, prove you are peaceful, now seemed almost childlike in its simplicity. Peace is not a state of being. It is a continuous, costly act, and the price is always paid by someone. The only choice any civilization ever has is whether to acknowledge the bill or pretend it does not exist. If you found this story worth your time, subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss another, because the next archive might be even harder to look away from.